Hello, my friends, and welcome to FISHTORY. I'm Alexander Williamson, your host, as always. Now, today we're going to be talking about a question that I get all the time, and that is, Alex, do you quarantine all your fish? And I used to answer with a lie. I used to answer on this channel, yeah, I always quarantine my fish, unless it's a new tank and I'm just putting one species in, or a couple different fish from the same place. I always quarantine. But I've been lying. I do not always quarantine my fish. In fact, a lot of times I don't quarantine my fish. In fact, I make it a point to pay more, a lot more, for my fish so that I do not have to quarantine them. I buy them from a source that quarantines them and that treats them with a fish veterinarian in order to not have to quarantine them. But all that said, any wild-caught fish, I'm still going to quarantine, and any number of 4 types of fish, I'm also going to quarantine. Now, we'll talk about what 4 fish those are, and they're groups of fish. Like I'm talking catfish, there's the first one. And that's because they eat anything off the bottom. They're scavengers, and they have evolved to be scavengers. So when they're scavenging, they have evolved to handle eating anything, whether that's a pleco or a cory cat or a woodcat. A lot of these fish have evolved to survive with parasites or with worms or all sorts of other things inside of them and not have it bother them. Or they even have armor or skin or plating that makes it so other illnesses don't show up in a way that they will in other common fish in the hobby. So even if you are quarantining them, you have no idea to know whether you quarantine them long enough or enough whatsoever unless you're thoroughly treating them. So that brings me to my next point, which is you should know that there are 2 major ways of quarantining fish, and there's one way that's much easier than the other. And there is a proactive way of quarantining fish, and then there is a passive way of quarantining fish. Now, most of the time, I will passively quarantine fish if they're from captivity and I reasonably trust where I'm buying my fish from. I will usually just observe them. I will put them in a sparsely decorated tank and I will look for behaviors. Behaviors like flashing or rubbing against hardscape. I'll usually have a stick, a few rocks, maybe some sand or gravel, but not any plants, and usually just a simple sponge filter or hang off the back filter, so that if there is an outbreak of something where I do need to add medication, I can add that, treat the system, nothing's gonna pass away or die in the plant world, and my bacterial cycle and all that stuff, I can keep it set up, and I can remove the medications, even antibiotics, by just adding an activated carbon and crushed carbon media bag to the back of my hang off the back filter. That will then suck up a lot of the medications, and I can take that out and toss it. Now, the other major way of quarantining fish is going to be to actually proactively treat these fish. And to do that, it's a reaction to, you get the fish in and you're going to give them something that's antibacterial, usually erythromycin, which is a gram-positive antibiotic, which means it stains a certain color, either gram-negative or gram-positive antibiotics. They stain different colors under the microscope when you're looking at slides. But overall, here's an easier way to know what kind of antibiotic to use for which situation. And that is, if it's gram positive, it is oxygen positive. It's on the outside usually. It is touching air. If it's gram negative, it's on the inside or in the body. So things like swollen, lumpy, infected areas, big protruding stomachs, eyes, mouth, gills, things like that that look infected, that's probably gram negative. And most fish coming in, you just shouldn't buy if they look like that. So most of the stuff we're treating for is going to be gram positive, and erythromycin works. There are a whole lot of other antibiotics out there, and depending on which country you live in, you might not even have access to antibiotics. So it may be that you're trying to do things like salt dips as your quarantine, or like making the water more acidic and then adding things like tannins or garlic. There are a whole number of other things. We can talk about that another time. But for now, I just want you to know that the reactive way to be quarantining your fish is using generally a completely plain tank, and you treat the fish in a regimen. So in 2 weeks, you're going to give them an antibiotic, gram-positive. You're going to give them something like General Cure or an anti-parasitic, an anti-fluke, and somewhat antifungal sometimes. Usually it's the active ingredients are either fenbendazole, flubendazole, or metroplex, or metronidazole really. And with metronidazole, you also get some antibacterial action in there as well. So people like Corey of Aquarium Co-op, he would treat for his shop with 3 specific medications unless he knew there was something else going on by his observations. And those 3 he would treat everything with were the antibiotic erythromycin, ICX, which is an outside kind of general cure, parasitic, fluke, and minor external parasite type treating medication. And then he would also use something like General Cure, and that would usually treat the parasites on a light level. Now, if there were worms or a real wasting issue where the fish looks really sunken in and so forth, then you can use something like levamisole, and that is a dewormer, and that is usually used by a lot of people that keep bigger fish, cichlids or catfish, things like that, and you can use it in a lot of countries, but I know a lot of countries nowadays are also cracking down on that, and you need to get information or a prescription from a veterinarian. I think it's well worth your time to go do so, and say you've got a 900-pound fish that you need to be treating quite frequently. No, I'm just kidding. But it is handy stuff to have, and you can buy it in the US as Zoomed Expel P, and that's levamisole. It's a dewormer. It treats things like Colmenares worms and tapeworms and pinworms, like real worms inside the body, and flatworms. And in conjunction with things like General Cure or an anti-parasitical, that will work together to get rid of most of those issues. Now, also fungal infections and gram-negative infections can be an issue. So while you're observing your fish, if it's got signs of things like dropsy or those swelling bumps or a big growth or something, that's when you would treat with gram-negative antibiotics if you can get your hands on them. If you can't, you can always try feeding garlic and doing salt dips, other home remedy type cures. Now, if you see them really bloated and they seem to be eating but not putting on weight, and their belly just looks kind of fat but the rest of them is shrunken and their shoulders hunched, or you see that they're really skinny and they're not putting on weight at all, period, you might assume that they have a parasite, and oftentimes it's a worm or some sort of protist or something living in there inside of them and eating the nutrients from them. So by fasting them for several days and then seeing what comes out of their cloaca, the hole in their belly, oftentimes you'll see the worms coming out and trying to feed, or even from the fish's mouth when you add a little bit of fish food to the tank, and if you look right away as that's happening. If this occurs, treat with the dewormer. So with all of this said, what are the other fish that I always treat with medication when I get them? Well, if it's wild and not raised in captivity, I always try to treat it with a dewormer and an anti-parasitical agent like fenbendazole or flubendazole. Gobies, gudgeons, anything that goes from fresh to salt, anything that's a brackish fish, I would definitely make sure that I treated those. Because coming from the wild, oftentimes they encounter those things and we can't control what's in the fish room. Now, oftentimes fish come in already stressed and they already look pale. Their slime coat is already thin, or they already look emaciated and their color's drained. So oftentimes I like to give a couple days of watching the fish, of just observing before I treat anything. Then I would treat those wild fish. Now, if they are tank raised, then I will watch for a few days and I will only treat if I see a illness. Now, if I get them from a truly trusted source, meaning a breeder that I know and I've been to where they breed their fish, I know their process, and I know that their fish are clean of any parasites, any diseases, and they're on top of it, and they know how to handle it if it were to break out some sort of infection, some sort of pathogen, then I will just plop and drop a fish into a tank. There is only one place I will buy fish in this manner, and that is dansfish.com. But boy, are you going to pay. So I only buy fish that I plan on breeding, fish that are endangered or are care species that need preservation, or fish that are going into a community tank that already has hundreds or thousands of dollars of fish in it, let alone plants that I just cannot spare money or the thought of them being harmed and having to put blue dye or having to put all sorts of harsh medicines in there and possibly contaminate both with illness and medication that ecosystem. So yeah, I will pay 2-3 times more sometimes for that peace of mind because he has a fish biologist vet on his staff, and he is dedicated to ethical treatment of fish, both in shipping and how he sells, stores, and handles them. That being said, he is an affiliate of mine, but if you're interested, I do have a 10% link for anybody who signs up with a new email. So if you haven't tried him in a long time and you got a new email since then, or maybe your spouse tried him a long time ago and you want to see what Dan's Fish is all about again, just use the code ALEX on a new email. You'll get 10% off. And once you are a returning customer, you'll also get a little discount as a thank you as well. And in return, I make a little bit, it helps out the channel, and then I can show you new cool species spotlights here in my fish room. That being said, what are the 4 fish that I mentioned that I always treat, whether they're wild caught, whether they're tank bred? That would be puffers, because they are little hunters and they love snails, and snails carry lots of pathogens and bacteria and lots of little parasites. Catfish, I will always treat catfish, and they are benthic feeders. They feed off the bottom, they scavenge, and they eat dead things. So even though they may be fine with a parasite, they may pass it on to another fish in my tank, like my angelfish or my discus or another pleco that's already in there. Then that may pass on to a pencilfish, to another fish, and soon they're weakened, and now we've got an ick outbreak, and we got this, and we got slime coat devolving, and soon you can have a whole problem with the whole tank. So catfish, puffers, loaches, because they're really just the Asian and African version of catfish in many ways. Even though catfish exist in Asia and Africa, there are lots of loaches in Southeast Asia that eat off the bottom. They eat dead things, and they eat just about anything that fits in their mouth. And lastly, livebearers. Livebearers eat a lot of interesting things, and there's a lot of room in their squiggly stomach and digestive system for worms in particular. So things like colmenaris worms, and especially in hobby-raised fish that have been with other hobby-raised fish, or even in the water of other hobby-raised fish, ick and stomach parasites are very common in those livebearers. So I always treat puffers, catfish, loaches, and livebearers. And if it's something like a special catfish, a woodcat, or a puffer that I've never had before, I will actually buy it from Dan's Fish. I will then put it in my tank right away and trust that Dan did it right. Now, he would say, Alex, quarantine it. And I'll usually, watch it for a couple days and make sure everything's okay. But that's how much I trust Dan's Fish, even though he doesn't recommend that. So with that being said, those are the 2 main methods of quarantining. Those are the 4 categories of fish, including a 5th one, which is all wild caught fish that haven't been quarantined by someone I know, that I quarantine. And I do it passively. Other than those 4, I will do a anti-worming and anti-parasitical prophylactic treatment. So if you learned a little bit today, if you've been keeping fish a long time and you think something is way different the way you do things, or you have a great tip, please let me know down below. I'm here to learn always. Also, I have to thank all you members, channel members that pay $1.99 and get access to all the behind the scenes stuff and all my research, as well as you Discord members, you people who subscribe, you people who like, and you people who share. That means so much to me, and I can't thank you all enough for all you do for this community. I hope you guys all have a great day. I hope your fish are doing well, staying healthy, and and I'll see you guys next time on Fishtory.